Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of movies, shows, and deep lore in one of the absolute greatest fictional universes ever created, well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're unpacking a fantastic resource called the Galaxy Field Guide. Just think of this explainer as your much-needed compass. We're going to use it to navigate the incredible, sometimes dizzying scale of this famous galaxy. Whether you're a newcomer just trying to figure out where on Earth to start, or a veteran fan trying to explain the whole shebang to a friend, we're going to lay it all out clearly.
Okay, let's dive into this. Like the author points out, the immense scale is exactly what makes this universe so amazing, but it can kind of feel like a locked door if you don't have the key. So for today, I'm going to be your personal galactic tour guide. We're adopting this really inviting premise right from the get-go. The galaxy is vast, but it is not unknowable. Let's take the tour.
So here is our itinerary for the trip. We're going to keep it super simple and cover 4 main areas today: the players, the map, the tech, and finally, the rules.
Starting off with Part 1, the players. We're talking heroes, villains, and droids.
You know, while these massive, galaxy-spanning empires constantly rise and fall, the fate of the galaxy literally turns on its everyday people. It's the farm boys, the runaway princesses, the scoundrels, and the fallen knights who give this sprawling story its actual heart and decide how history unfolds. Now, at the absolute core of the central conflict are 2 ancient, entirely opposing organizations. On one side, we've got the Jedi Order. These guys were the guardians of peace and justice for thousands of years, relying on the light side of the Force and strictly setting aside personal attachments. And perfectly contrasted against them are the Sith. This is a dark side order built on raw emotion, passion, power, and betrayal, operating almost entirely in the shadows. And what's just so tragic about this whole dynamic is how the extreme rigidity and pride of the Jedi actually blinded them to the Sith, who were, incredibly, hiding in plain sight the entire time.
And speaking of the Jedi, 900. That is a massive number, and it represents the centuries of wisdom packed into Yoda. He's this small, green, deceptively frail-looking master who trained literal generations of knights. What's absolutely fascinating about Yoda's lore, though, is that his species remains a deliberate, completely unnamed mystery in the saga. I mean, in a universe that loves to explain every single background detail, his origins are intentionally left completely blank. And this brilliantly illustrates a really unique aspect of this universe, the droids. In most sci-fi, robots are just tools, right? But here, machines have real personalities. They have fears, they have loyalties, even though they're pretty much treated as second-class citizens. You've got astromechs like R2-D2 and Chopper, who are brave, incredibly stubborn, and hold massive galactic secrets. Then there are anxious protocol droids like C-3PO, who are fluent in millions of forms of communication. And of course, the mass-produced, highly expendable combat droids that often end up providing some much-needed comic relief. These mechanical characters actually provide the saga's quiet moral thread. All right, moving on to Part 2, the map. We're looking at worlds and factions. The wildly varied planets of his galaxy, from worlds covered entirely by a single sprawling city to remote, freezing wastes, are absolutely characters in their own right. But you know, it's not just about the planets themselves, it's about who's ruling them. On one hand, we have the Galactic Republic, which enjoyed 1,000 years of democratic rule before suffering this really slow, painful decay into corrupt bureaucracy. And then there's the Galactic Empire, a brutal dictatorship built on human supremacy and rule by sheer terror. The great political lesson of this whole story is actually pretty chilling. The Republic wasn't conquered from the outside. No, its own Senate willingly voted itself right into a dictatorship, step by step, essentially handing over power to a patient tyrant.
Let's move to and see how this builds across the macro-political shifts of the galaxy. When you look at the flow of history here, you can really see the constant churn of power. We go from the ancient Republic, plunging straight into the manufactured conflict of the Clone Wars, which of course birthed the Galactic Empire. Then comes a hard-won post-Empire New Republic, which unfortunately became dangerously complacent. And that complacency led directly to the rise of the fanatical First Order in the recent era.
Yet, despite all these grand galactic shifts and glittering capital worlds, it's amazing how the galaxy's fate so often turns on its most overlooked, dusty corners. Take Tatooine, for example. It's this harsh, sun-scorched desert world way out at the very edge of the galaxy, famously orbited by twin suns. I mean, it's a completely lawless place ruled by crime lords, but somehow it's the exact spot where the entire saga keeps beginning, generation after generation.
Next up is Part 3, the tech. Let's talk ships and vehicles.
So, how does everyone actually get around this vast map? Well, usually while being shot at. When you break down these iconic vessels, you can see drastically different philosophies at play. For fighters, you've got the Rebel X-Wing, which represents a really smart balance of speed, firepower, and survivability. Contrast that with the Imperial TIE Fighter, totally unshielded, mass-produced, and designed purely for overwhelming expendable swarms. Then we have freighters, like the Ghost and the Millennium Falcon, which often serve as improvised, extremely temperamental homes for our heroes. And finally, those capital ships. The colossal wedge-shaped Star Destroyers exist purely as flying symbols of absolute intimidation.
And hey, speaking of freighters, we absolutely have to talk about the Millennium Falcon. It is famously known as the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy. What makes this heavily modified ship so beloved, aside from the incredible trivia that Han Solo actually won the thing in a high-stakes card game, is its utter unreliability. It is always exactly one lucky, desperate repair away from saving the day.
But when we look at ground assaults, the Empire relies on these massive, four-legged mechanical beasts called AT-AT walkers. So how do you defeat a walking machine that is basically impervious to frontal firepower? Well, with pure rebel ingenuity. They deployed these agile little snow speeders, fired simple harpoons and tow cables into the legs, and just circled around to tangle the giant machines and trip them up. It's such a perfect example of overcoming a massive technological superpower with clever on-the-fly tactics.
Finally, we arrive at Part 4, the rules. We're diving into the Force and the deeper lore.
Let's take a look at the essential concepts and mystical laws that govern this entire saga. And don't worry, we won't get bogged down in homework here. At the very center of it all is the Force. It's defined as this mysterious energy field created by all living things that binds the entire galaxy together. A very rare few are sensitive enough to actually perceive and shape it, and while some cynical characters in the galaxy totally dismiss it as a hokey religion or mere superstition, this invisible web is absolutely the engine for nearly every wonder, miracle, and tragedy in the whole story. Now, what's really interesting about this is the dual nature of kyber crystals. These are rare, Force-attuned crystals found on sacred worlds. Now, usually they power a lightsaber and actually determine its color, creating a deeply personal connection for a Jedi. But if gathered in enormous quantities, the Empire weaponized these exact same sacred objects on a massive scale to power their planet-killing superweapons. It literally connects a Jedi's deeply personal blade directly to an instrument of unimaginable galactic terror.
And speaking of terror, let's talk about the number 2. For 1,000 years, the Sith operated under a strict rule of 2. There was only ever one master to embody power and one apprentice to crave it. After greed and infighting nearly destroyed them in the past, this chilling rule prevented internal wars and kept their incredibly patient plot to retake the galaxy completely hidden.
And that hidden plot? Well, it ultimately culminated in Order 66. This was a secret command that was biologically embedded right into the programming of the Republic's own clone soldiers. In a single night, the hero's own army turned instantly against their Jedi commanders. It is easily one of the darkest turning points of the story. A horrific trap built right into the soldiers themselves, executed without a single question.
So the crucial point is, this universe is incredibly rich in its details. Let's do a rapid-fire trivia round to reward you for sticking with me. Did you know the famous Kessel Run boast is actually a measure of distance, not time? It represents a highly dangerous hyperspace shortcut. Or how about those cuddly Ewoks on the Forest Moon? They defeated an elite Imperial Legion using literally just logs and rocks. Wookiees, like Chewbacca, can live for several centuries. The legendary, unique black-bladed Darksaber actually confers political leadership, but it absolutely must be won in combat. And, astonishingly, a single, speedy A-Wing crashing into a command bridge was enough to take down a colossal, city-size superstar destroyer. It's these quirky, amazing details that make the universe feel so deeply lived in.
All right, we've covered the legendary characters, the iconic planets, the recognizable ships, and the mystical rules of the Force itself. But as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a really massive question to ponder. This galaxy is an endless cycle of rising, tyrannical empires and scrappy, hopeful rebellions. It's a constant, raging clash between the light and the dark. So, will there ever be true balance? Or is the struggle itself the whole point? I'll leave you to explore this vast, but hopefully now much more knowable, map on your own to find out. Thank you so much for joining me on the tour,